join hand with the notorious.
We all might have perceptions, opinions, and judgments, but the writers have a clear understanding and a proper intention while creating characters. Let me tell you about Frank Herbert's spine-chilling reason for writing the Dune novels. In 1980, he said he wrote them to warn us that charismatic leaders should come with a warning label saying, "May be dangerous to your health." Throughout his life, Herbert believed heroes would always lead to disaster. He thought that even if we found a real superhero, regular people with all their flaws would gather around them, creating a dangerous power that would eventually be misused. He looked at leaders like Hitler, Churchill, and Stalin as proof of this dangerous human weakness. In the Dune story, Paul Atreides isn't meant to be seen as a hero or savior. He's not really the chosen one. His destiny is built on myths and lies. Let me explain why this is so important. At first, Paul's story looks like a typical hero's journey. He's born into a powerful family, gets thrown into a strange world, sees his father killed, barely escapes death himself, and becomes a savior to the Fremen people of Arrakis. But his story turns these hero ideas upside down. Being the chosen one becomes his biggest problem. And instead of saving the world like most heroes, Paul's story shows us how heavy and terrible this destiny really is. We learn early on that Paul wasn't even supposed to exist. The Bene Gesserit had been carefully breeding humans for centuries to create their Kwisatz Haderach. But Paul was a mistake. His mother was supposed to have a daughter who would marry Feyd-Rautha, and their child would be the chosen one. But Paul happened anyway, and even though he wasn't the planned chosen one, he ended up taking on that destiny. Think about Paul's life. As Duke Leto's son, he was always meant to become the next duke. He spent his whole childhood preparing for this role. His mother, being a Bene Gesserit, also trained him in their special ways. Now, imagine being just 15 years old, carrying all that pressure, and then arriving on Dune to hear all these prophecies about who you're supposed to become. The pressure would be unbearable. This is when Paul's dreams and visions become intense. He sees himself in the future, leading a holy war, with people shouting his name as they go into battle. He wants to fight against this future, but feels helpless, because he's not even sure what choices he'll make. This doubt consumes him. When someone is drowning in doubt, especially a supposed savior, what do they need? Paul finds this in the Fremen's complete faith in him. When Paul tries to be humble and says he's not their Messiah, Stilgar, the Fremen leader, says, "You are too humble to say so, exactly as written." This kind of blind belief is dangerous. Of course, Paul's background commands respect. The way he carries himself, how he speaks, shows he's special. This really connects with the Fremen, who are isolated, superstitious, and desperately need a leader. But there's a problem. Paul's natural charm and the Fremen's desperate need for a savior create the perfect storm. The more the Fremen believe in Paul as their Messiah, the more his own doubts get pushed aside, pushing him toward the role he fears. We watch the young boy trained to be a duke disappear, replaced by the Kwisatz Haderach, a savior figure. The Fremen see this as a miracle, not realizing it's actually the result of centuries of manipulation by the Bene Gesserit, who have been shaping beliefs across the galaxy for thousands of years. But the Fremen believe it completely, and more importantly, so does Paul. Unlike other chosen ones who try to become better people, Paul focuses on doing what he thinks must be done. This kind of thinking is dangerous. People who do what they see as necessary can easily become villains, or at least cause many deaths. This is Paul's tragedy. He gets caught up in the crowd's belief in him, and accepts his destiny as their savior. But deep down, like many real-world leaders, he has a more personal goal. He wants to make House Harkonnen pay for killing his father. And he's willing to use the Fremen's faith in him to do it. Paul isn't purposely trying to use the Fremen, but he knows that leading them is his only path to revenge. When he first sees possible futures, He sees ways he and his mother could survive without starting a holy war, but he rejects these because they don't give him his revenge. The only path that promises vengeance requires leading the Fremen, but this path also leads to the unstoppable holy war. Remember his words to his mother at the beginning of Part 2, where he admits he believes in revenge. Even at the end, powered by the Fremen's support, he declares war on the Imperial forces with an icy calm, telling his followers to lead them to paradise. It's really asking them to die so he can win. This starts the holy war that devastates billions. The very future he feared as a child comes true, because of his own actions. Paul actually becomes a disaster for the Fremen. Instead of leading them to paradise, he leads them into an interstellar holy war. Even those who survive will be forever changed. While the Fremen wanted their savior to restore their planet, Paul leads them away from home, turning them from freedom fighters into religious fanatics. Chani sees this clearly, especially in Part 2. She believes the Fremen should fight for their own freedom rather than wait for an off-world savior, but her efforts alone can't stop what's happening. Paul's story teaches us a hard truth. No human, no matter how heroic they seem, can save us. They're not all-knowing and ultimately do what serves their own deepest desires. But we can't blame everything on Paul. He would never have gained such power without the unstable political system and the Bene Gesserit's manipulation. If it wasn't Paul, someone else would have become their messiah. This shows us Frank Herbert's main message. The real problem isn't just the individual leaders, it's the system that creates these figures and gives them so much power. This same system turned the once green Dune into the desert Arrakis, recognizes its problems, but still waits for a promised savior to fix everything. And that's the real tragedy of Paul Atreides. Well, this is what happens as per the novels. When Paul Atreides became emperor, he never expected his rule would cause a holy war that spread death across space. Haunted by this, and now blind, he walked into the desert in the year, never to be seen again. His son Leto II then became emperor, but he had a special plan called the Golden Path. He believed this plan would save all of humanity from dying out. To make this happen, he did something incredible. He joined his body with desert creatures called sand trout, turning himself into a powerful being that was part human, part worm. People started calling him the God Emperor. Leto ruled for over 3,500 years, controlling all the spice in the universe and carefully guiding humanity's future. When he was killed in the year, something amazing happened. Just as he had planned, people scattered across space, exploring new worlds and stars. Many years later, in 15200, these scattered people started coming back. They brought with them new groups like the honored Matres, who became enemies with the Bene Gesserit. After fighting for a while, these two groups eventually joined together. During this time, some machines made a copy of Paul Atreides, but it was Duncan Idaho, a warrior who had been brought back to life many times, who became the most important person in the story. Duncan joined with a thinking machine named Erasmus, creating a new kind of being that brought humans and machines together in peace. This ended the old conflicts that had divided them for so long. The story ends, thousands of years later, in the year 200, when a man named Garando gave a speech celebrating 1,000 years since Leto Tekken's rule. By then, people still remembered these amazing events that had shaped their universe forever.